Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Renaud Brossard. He is the Vice President Communications at the Montreal Economic Institute. Renaud, I know we've talked about why tariffs are bad for the Canadian economy, why tariffs are bad for the U.S. economy. Let's start to discuss one by one some of the alternatives that the MEI has supported. I know you've supported reduction in interprovincial trade barriers as an example. Let's talk about that first. Why have you supported that?
Well, the US is just not as reliable a trading partner as it once was. And I think Trump is the latest manifestation of that. But it's not the first time that we've had some trade scares with the US. The Buy American Act certainly hurt us. We've seen, approvals and reversals on the Keystone XL pipeline. So that level of reliability that we once thought we had in the US market simply isn't as strong as we thought it was. So the best way to respond to that, in our view, is to strengthen the Canadian economy. And part of that can be done by simplifying trade between our provinces. It should not be harder for a business to ship from Canada to London, England, than to ship to London, Ontario, or to neighboring province. But there's a number of goods, a number of services for which regulations and even outright barriers to trade sometimes make it especially hard to ship between our provinces. So by strengthening those bonds, it's going to be possible for our businesses to shift their focus from trading primarily with the US and trading more with Canada, as well, more with the Europeans, more with the Asian countries, and that's a good thing too. But we should be able to do that sort of trade at home as well.
Now, a bit of an editorial comment here, but when I think about interprovincial trade barriers, when I was a cabinet minister, this was a topic of conversation too, and other economic reforms generally, getting pipelines built, those kinds of things. Quebec has historically and traditionally been one of the biggest impediments to those kinds of changes in our economy. Can you comment on that at least?
Absolutely, and it's unfortunate that Quebec governments and successive Quebec governments have not made a lot of progress in interprovincial trade. When we signed the Canadian Free Trade Agreement back in 2017, Quebec had 35 codified barriers to trade in that agreement. To date, it has 36. So it has been moving in the wrong direction. There seems to be some momentum now to start moving in the right direction. I know that the provincial government, with Minister Christopher Skeet, has announced that there would be some barriers removed. Now they started looking at the first five to be removed, which are things like horse racing. A racehorse from Ontario will now be able to compete in Quebec's hippodromes without having some sort of impediment. Part of what they've been doing so far has been very, very small.
Hmm.
But at least there seems to be some interest in moving ahead. But as you know, a lot of these issues with interprovincial trade have to do with regulations.
Right.
Every single province has built up their sort of regulatory agenda in a way that's different from the neighboring province. So a good example, I think, is between Alberta and BC. The province of Alberta, or one of these two, allows you to move oversized freight only during the day, and then the next one is only at night. So if you have to move a large piece of equipment, let's say from Edmonton to Fort St. John for our energy industry, well, you're gonna start your journey and then have to stop the truck for a couple of hours at the provincial border and wait until nightfall, then keep doing those deliveries. All of these things add up ultimately. The provincial government's approach in Quebec has been to try and harmonize regulation first and then trade later. And I think that's part of why things have been so slow moving, is because every single province agrees with need to trade, but every single province wants every other province to adopt their own standards. And so bureaucrats keep arguing on one side and the other, and there's no
Hmm.
movement. I think the most novel thing that's been happening actually comes out of Nova Scotia. Premier
Right.
Tim Houston, his Free Trade and Mobility within Canada Act, is essentially a different approach. It's trade first, harmonize later, by recognizing the standards from different provinces, basically saying, if Ontario says this is good enough for Ontarians, it should be good enough for Nova Scotians and vice versa. This is something that makes a very, very strong move in the right direction. And it's the sort of thing, again, that would help us strengthen our economy and better phase the threat of US tariffs. and essentially reduce the impact that this could have, that these threats could have on our economic growth and on our shared prosperity as Canadians.
Yeah, no, it's a very positive development what Premier Houston from Nova Scotia is doing with his free trade legislation. We'll see how that's picked up by the rest of the provinces. Renaud, we're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with you after these messages.